Hello, and choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Matrix month, and this week we are talking the 2003 film, The Matrix Reloaded. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host program, Andrew Williams. You ready to hack in, Andrew?
God, you don't have to remind me even more that my grasp of what existence is tenuous, and I might not even be real, Chris. I stared at the wall for an hour last night. You didn't need to add to it, but no, I'm excited to talk about these. I've revisited these a couple of times, partly at your urging, mostly, to kind of because I kind of fell into that classic. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, a little bit more, but like I saw when they came out, and I was just kind of like, all right, and then kind of never really went back. A couple of times here and there, but yeah, having a chance to kind of, especially now, go back and rewatch it and see everything. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this and bring out the positives.
I mean, I'm certainly excited to talk about them. Gonna say this up front. I love these movies. I love all of the Matrix movies. I've been down since day one, a bit of a defender, and I hate that I even have to get put in that position, but these sequels get trashed regularly, basically since they came out. We're gonna dig into the specific numbers of this one, like number 2, Reloaded. It's kind of pretty well received. It makes a ton of money. Yeah. It's got good reviews and stuff, but the legacy of these films, this gets lumped in with the third movie. This gets lumped in as a Matrix sequel. The overall consensus you'll see amongst movie fans is, the first Matrix, sci-fi classic, everyone loves it. Don't bother with the sequels. You will hear that over and over again.
Oh, yes.
And like I said, this movie gets lumped along with them, and I say that's nonsense. And I'm excited to talk about the positives of these films, of which I believe there are many. It is going to be a very fun month as we go through these sequels: The Matrix Reloaded, Revolutions, and of course, Resurrections. Also landing this month will be episode 100 of our podcast, coming up in just a couple of weeks. We're going to break away from the Matrix theme for a standalone episode 100, and then come back at the end of the month with Resurrections. Lots of fun stuff in store this month. But without further ado, let's jump into this one here. Let's set the stage a little bit. The Matrix Reloaded is released May 15th of 2003, made on a budget of as much as $150 million. Matrix 2 and 3 were filmed back to back. Their budgets kind of bleed together, but you can basically divide it in half and say each movie cost about $150 million to make. At the box office, it certainly makes a return on that budget. It brings in $742 million. At the time, that was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time, and it held that record for quite a long time until Deadpool came along. Critically, pretty well received, honestly. It holds a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes. Initially, critics were still on board the Matrix train, and even looking at the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a 72%. So, as I said, I consider myself a defender, but I'm not the only one out there. It is still an extremely popular franchise at the end of the day, even if we do have that consensus of the first one has never been topped.
Well, yeah, and that's always such a weird, because the thing you kind of hear is that, you mentioned it, like The Matrix is this classic. It ends it on a pretty, the first Matrix is pretty much a closed story. Like, obviously there's places to go, but the narrative of The Matrix is fairly contained, and I believe that was by design. You don't know if it's going to be successful enough to keep going, especially on a kind of a new franchise. This is not something that's, this was the late 90s. The idea of, franchises was of original content, no less, was still kind of uncharted waters for the most part. At the time, we were kind of in a weird place with film at the time. But can I say at the time anymore? Probably at the time. But the first one is still seen as that classic, and for a lot of people, I think it's relatively contained. And then these two sequels come out the same year, which is, you talk about filming sequels at the same time and releasing them back to back. Even the Lord of the Rings movies didn't come out the same year, which is pretty impressive. So, but yeah, that legacy is basically The Matrix was great. It was a fantastic sci-fi classic. Definitely playing in the same sandbox and paying homage to a lot of other different, pieces of sci-fi media from over the years, kind of mixing it all together with their original concepts to make this, great movie. It's fantastic. But the sequels just, especially over time, people just really don't seem to care for them. Reloaded is the better received of the sequels. Like you said, those numbers kind of speak for themselves. We're looking at a tremendous box office return. We're looking at relatively solid reviews. Even the audience score is still pretty high. It's the third movie that really kind of spurns it, I guess. But given that they're two parts of the same story, I mean, this movie basically ends with a to be concluded stinger. So, I mean, I think that kind of retroactively makes everybody kind of look back at them poorly. And not a whole lot of people, I think, going back to these. And I think that was definitely something that we'll talk about it a little bit more on the Matrix Resurrections episode. But I think that was definitely a common thought when they announced a Matrix 4, was just kind of like, really? Is this where we are as a people? But it's
I think it's a good point, and there's not a lot of going back to it. Like I said, there's plenty of fans of these movies, myself included.
Or anything.
Right, but people that love these movies have loved them since they came out. There's not people that like hated them once upon a time, and then they watched some video essays and now they love them. There hasn't been that kind of tide turning. It's just either you're in or you're out. And that's a good point about that first movie being, it can function as a standalone. There's a big kind of cliffhanger at the end and it really opens the doors, but it's a satisfying story and it could be looked at as an ending. And so when you look at sequels, I think a lot of people, and look, if you don't like these movies, I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong or you should. But I will say a lot of people, I think, had these ideas in their head about where the series could go or should go. And the Wachowskis did not go that specific direction. They just opened up the doors in ways that most people were not even trying to imagine. In fact, I remember so distinctly on some morning show, some morning talk show, Leonard Maltin was on there whenever The Matrix Reloaded came out. Film critic Leonard Maltin, and he was talking about it. And I think ultimately he was kind of positive about it, but his big, detriment, his big negative on the film was like, we should have never seen Zion. That should have just been a place that we know about and is in our head, but it demystifies it by showing us Zion. And you can't tell the story that they're telling without showing us Zion, especially that third one. Granted, Leonard hadn't seen the third one at that point, but it's just, again, like people wanted, I think, more stuff inside the Matrix, more wild special effects, and just maybe weren't interested in other parts of the story that they chose to take it. So again, that's not to say like if you like it, it's just because you had preconceived notions, but I do think that factors in to some of the backlash that the sequels got.
And it's weird because that's something that has arguably taken root even more now. We definitely see a lot of fan reactions. And again, I'm not trying to say that like you can't dislike things just because you wanted the story to go a different place and that's not where it went. But I feel like here lately, you've especially seen that more, and I'll go ahead and name drop it with stuff like Star Wars, where you question if it's, I'm annoyed at what the story did, or I'm more annoyed at what the story didn't do. It becomes a very interesting conversation because those are two different things. It's one thing to not like what a movie does. It's another thing to not like it for not doing what you wanted it to do. And I mean, I'm always like, and don't get me wrong, there's movies I've seen where I didn't really care for them, and I'm like, man, here's what I would have done that would have been a little bit better in my head. I'm not the guy that writes a whole Facebook post about it because, who am I? But at the same time, I think that definitely applies to the Matrix because, and it's a little weird because you do get plenty of in Matrix stuff. It's not like that stuff is missing here, especially in this movie.
Right.
You get a lot of it here, and I think maybe it's Revolutions where that kind of goes a little bit more. The balance goes a little bit more the other way, but yeah, I think that's definitely a point. The idea that they saw the world a certain way and the Wachowskis saw it another way. And I'm not going to tell them that their view of the world obviously isn't correct. It's their world. They saw fit to tell the story they wanted to. And if you don't care for it, that's fine. You don't have to.
As we've already mentioned here, the movie is written and directed by the Wachowskis. They obviously also wrote and directed the first Matrix movie. And honestly, they kind of Citizen Kane themselves with this franchise. I mean, technically,
a little bit,
they make Bound first, which most people have not seen. It's a very low budget film, but kind of an indie critical darling. But there's nothing in that movie which is like a noir drama that you watch and go, oh, these directors are going to make a sci-fi classic next. There's not really much shared DNA, I think, between those two movies, at least on the surface. But they're given like the keys to the kingdom. They're given this significant budget to make The Matrix. They pitched the movie to Joel Silver, producer at Warner Bros. They greenlight it and, off to the races. The Matrix was the biggest thing in the world when it came out. So, of course, they're going to give them an almost infinite budget to make 2 sequels, plus a series of animated short films, plus a video game with like 40 minutes of exclusive footage just for the game. Like, this story being told in these sequels plays out across several different forms of media. You could just watch the movies until you get a complete story, but there's a lot of stuff around it that enhance it, that cost a lot of money. I mean, insanely ambitious project, these Matrix sequels.
It's the kind of thing that you hear studios talk about trying to do today, and it never works. Like, it's the whole, we're going to tell this story over,
100%.
We're going to have television shows, we're going to have movies. It's the only thing you can even remotely compare it to would possibly be the MCU, but that is so sprawling, and it took almost a decade before television was even a factor with that, and it's definitely not as connected a story as something like The Matrix is. But the video games, the tie-in media, all of that is just tremendous. And like I said, I definitely agree on the Bound to Matrix. Like, I'm sure there's things you can look at and kind of, like, even just from like a filmmaking perspective, kind of see some of the DNA. But you can also look, obviously, at influences, things like Akira, even stuff like Dark City. I don't know how far you want to go on it, but there's plenty of influences at play there. But Bound is not a movie that I watch and immediately think, oh, yeah, sci-fi. They're primed for a sci-fi classic. Like, that's not the place my brain goes with it. But yeah, this franchise from 99 to 2004, I mean, it was everywhere. It was like, it's still parodied today. I mean, the whole bullet time thing that was used in movies like starting the same year. I think The Matrix came out. There were movies that were making fun of
Scary Movie comes out the same year and has a gag in it.
Yeah, and so you're looking at an immediate response and an immediate, like, cultural awareness of The Matrix, and that's a rare thing for something to hit that hard and especially that fast. It typically takes a couple of years for something to kind of enter into the lexicon like that, but this was almost immediate from when it came out. And so when this came out, it's fair to say that it was heavily anticipated. Like, this was hyped, people were ready, and like I said, it was a whole thing. So
before we jump into the movie, while we're talking about the creative team behind it, I feel like I have to shout out Yin Wu Ping, who's the fight coordinator on these first 3 films.
Oh, yeah.
And just as instrumental in the success of these films as the Wachowskis themselves, in my opinion. Just basically a third director with how much fight choreography and straight up kung fu scenes we have jam-packed in these movies. And they are just shot and captured brilliantly. And I mean, there's no way to talk about this without sounding super pretentious, but it's shot in a way that you typically don't see in American Hollywood productions, where you get these wide camera shots and you can see the fight choreography. There's not a ton of cuts that break apart, what's actually happening. It's very clear what's in frame, and it's just absolutely thrilling. How do you make your movie feel like it's a genuine kung fu film? You hire a genuine kung fu director. Yin Wu-ping has been around for decades by the time that first Matrix movie comes out, both as a director of Hong Kong cinema and a fight choreographer with movies like the Matrix movies, both Kill Bill films, a couple of the Ip Man films, and Kung Fu Hustle, of all things. So
the greatest movie of all time.
Absolute legend, and just truly just his presence is felt in every one of these movies.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely something that you have to acknowledge. I mean, he's the guy that directed Drunken Master. I mean, that's a kung fu classic. And I mean, you just look at some of the stuff he's done. It's absolutely insane. It's just movie after movie after movie after movie, with almost all of them having just beautiful fight choreography, stuff like Iron Monkey, stuff like Tai Chi Master. And then, like you said, you look at his as an action fight choreographer, it's Matrix, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The latter two of the Ip Man films, as you mentioned, just tons of stuff where you're like, this guy gets it, and it shows. And like you said, this is not, I've probably mentioned it before, but there's that scene in Taken, one of the Taken sequels, where Liam Neeson jumps over a fence and there's like 26 cuts. It's absolutely ridiculous. But here's a movie with these long extended fight sequences, and that camera linger. It lets you see the fight. It lets it, and nobody's even jumping over a fence. They're just fighting people. It's who would have thought? But it's just genuinely beautiful choreography, and they don't overdo like the sound effects too. That's something that obviously in a lot of older movies, when people get punched, it sounds like a friggin' explosion. We're going for very subtle, genuine kind of sounds here that make it feel even more authentic. So it's, like I said, you got to shout that out. Can't be denied how, it's like, if these fights were flat, boring, this movie's not nearly as much of a classic. If you don't have that piece of it, I think you lose a lot. So yeah, definitely worth shouting out.
Yeah. I mean, the man's worked with Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Donnie Yen, Chow Yun-fat, and Keanu Reeves, the 5 kung fu greats.
And Stephen Chow. How dare you?
Who would you knock out for Stephen Chow, Andrew?
No one. I would just add Stephen Chow.
Okay, the 6 kung fu greats. Perfect.
He wrote and directed Kung Fu Hustle. You cannot leave him out.
All right, Andrew, let's jump into this movie. You ready?
Yeah.
When the last remaining humans of Zion discover the machine's plans to dig through the earth and wipe out civilization, there is not a consensus on how to handle the situation. Some cling to the prophecy of the One and believe Neo will be their savior. Others think there is a final stand coming between man and machine. Within the Matrix, Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity seek guidance from the Oracle and learn that the path of the One leads to the Source, a door that connects the Matrix to the machine mainframe. As they battle to reach their destination, the program known as Smith is multiplying within the Matrix and becoming an ever greater threat to the heroes. Neo is successful in reaching the Source, but learns that his journey is not yet over. Dun, 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 dun. I love that final note in this movie. It's so like over the top and dramatic. Feels like a truly classic cliffhanger cinema. But this movie, man, what a freaking cliffhanger. But that's getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about this film. All the best parts, all of our favorite scenes. It is a 2-hour and 20-minute movie. We'll be talking for the next 3 hours about everything we love about this film. Strap in. Before we get to those scenes, though, gotta talk about this cast. Starting with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the film, because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, why don't you start us off here? Who is getting a Mark Strong Award for The Matrix Reloaded?
I thought about this long and hard because it is a deep, deep cast with a lot of options. But I am going to be going with Laurence Fishburne as Morpheus. I think that he's definitely a backbone of these first two films, especially. He's definitely a guiding force of that whole first movie. He's basically the one that's kind of holding your hand through the film. Not like in a you're too dumb to understand this kind of way, but more so in just there is a lot going on with a lot of high concepts, and he's kind of relaying that to the audience in real time, essentially. But here he's still acting as this kind of conscience of this cause, the belief that Neo is going to save everyone, essentially, for lack of a better way to put it. He believes that Neo is the one, and he believes that if they achieve their goal, the war with the machines will be ended. He has this unwavering belief in that. And he gets to make several rousing speeches and several motivational infomercials that portray this. He gets to really sell that pretty hard. And yeah, it's Laurence Fishburne. He's always going to add a little bit of how you say, Chris?
Gravitas.
Thanks, Batman. Yeah, and so yeah, you can never go wrong. He's always going to be important, make it feel important, and he definitely does here. So yeah, I'm going with Laurence Fishburne as Morpheus for my Mark Strong Award winner.
Dude, what a pick. I mean, he's so good. Bringing that gravitas, like you said, and just his delivery. It shouldn't work as well as it does. Like, it feels important. It feels serious. It feels gravitas-y. But I don't know, in a lesser talented person, it would feel like they're chewing the scenery and going like over the top, and you would kind of lose focus. But it always feels important. It always feels serious. And the choices that he makes with his line deliveries, there's so many to choose from. But one of my favorites, one that is always like stuck in my head, it lives in my head rent free, the way he delivers this line whenever he gives the rousing speech to the big like dance party that's about to break out. And he says, "I remember for 100 years we have fought these machines." Just the pauses and the inflections as he's projecting his voice across this cavern. It's so good, and it gets you hyped up. This movie is hyping you up with its speeches. It's hyping you up with its kung fu action. I'll be honest, I finished this movie and I was like, I want to watch the next one. Like, I'm ready to keep this rolling, but I'm holding off. Gotta get our thoughts out here before I dive into that one. But yeah, man, what a great pick. He's almost easy to overlook how good he is because it's Laurence Fishburne. Like, of course he's gonna knock it out of the park. Fish. What can I say about Fish? There's this interview with Tom Cruise for Mission Impossible 3, which Laurence Fishburne is in. And he says that. He's talking about Laurence Fishburne, and he says Fish like 5 times. He's like, "Oh, Fish. Man, Fish is great. Me and Fish, wow, we go back. Who can you say about Fish?" And it's like, we get it. You're friends. You can call him Fish. I get it. It's one of those weird, like, Tom Cruise trying to act like a normal human, and it's the one thing. Yeah,
it's like it's like an alien approximating a human. Oh, just shorten his name to Fish. That's normal, right? That's what humans do. Perfect. Nailed it. First try. Oh, Fish. I mean, what can you say about Fish? When it comes to people like Fish, there's nobody like Fish. Truly.
True though, Legend of the Screen. I mean, the dude was in Apocalypse Now, for crying out loud. I mean, he's been at it for decades.
He's been active since '72. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, you think about that first Matrix comes out, he's still only. He's born in '61, so like he's so young in Apocalypse Now. He's like 18 in Apocalypse Now. So like by the time The Matrix comes out, he's not even 40 yet. Like, he's only a few years older than us, Chris. If you need another existential crisis to pile onto the existing ones, Laurence Fishburne is only like 3 years older than me when he makes The Matrix. But yeah, just a legend. And then obviously him and Keanu got to reteam for a little bit with the John Wick movies and those are still coming. So always still out there. I mean, he's Fish. What can you say?
He's Fish. What's there to say about Fish? Andrew, great pick for Mark Strong Award. I'm giving it to someone else. I'm guessing you know who I'm giving it to. There is no... Dude, great performances up and down. I love these movies, but I have a hard time even thinking about giving the Mark Strong Award to anybody other than Hugo Weaving as Smith.
Yep.
Dude, this is top 3 villain performances of all time for me personally. It's up there. Heath Ledger's Joker, Anton Chigurh, Hugo Weaving as Smith. It's an all-timer. He is chewing the scenery. I will say he doesn't borderline doing it. He is chewing it, and it works so well. This villain, who is like literally a program, literally a machine, could be so stiff and robotic and boring, but he brings it over the top in such a fantastical way. In that first movie, it's like he's bound by being this program, but you can tell there's just this seething hatred underneath that's just like oozing out every chance that he gets, and he gets to really let loose in parts 2 and 3, and I love it. I love, again, all of his line deliveries and the choices that he makes, and I don't know. I don't know what else I can say other than just I love every single thing about Hugo Weaving's performance as Agent Smith. Literally one of my favorite characters in all of cinema.
And yeah, I mean, and it kind of gets lost on me sometimes. It just from like 2001 to 2003, like Hugo Weaving was in all 3 of the Lord of the Rings films and the 2 Matrix suits. That dude was everywhere. So like that dude was like in like 2 or 3 of the biggest films of each year consecutively. And 2003 alone, he's got both Matrix sequels and the final Lord of the Rings film. So this dude was literally, it turned him into a household name. Because before that, I mean, after the Matrix, people definitely knew who he was. But after like both those franchises completed, this guy was a household name. And then you throw in things like V for Vendetta, Captain America, stuff like that. He literally went from like, it's the longest success story, but overnight, basically, at age 40 to become a household name. But he's fantastic. And in these movies, it's no exception. He really is. This movie, he's definitely more subdued. Obviously, there's more to come with Smith, obviously, as both this film and its ending suggest. But he still manages to have a deeply memorable fight scene that I'm sure we'll be talking about later. And he's this kind of, I say this, he's this like infection that's just slowly spreading. And I guess that's definitely the intention. But this is the movie where it's definitely like bubbling under the surface. The fight with Neo is definitely a precursor to their fight that comes in the next film. The things that he's doing along the way, kind of hijacking things, being able to kind of bring some stuff forward. Like I said, we'll talk more about it later. But he's definitely all over this film, despite not technically being the main antagonist of this film. And it's fantastic. He makes it all memorable. He draws your attention anytime he's on screen. Like anytime he's in a sequence, you can't help but just be captivated by what he's doing. And yeah, it's fantastic. I can't disagree with you at all for picking this as your Mark Strong. He's Hugo Weaving. Can't go wrong.
I like that he gets to have more of a sense of humor as the movies go on too. As it just becomes more unhinged and maniacal as he multiplies and copying himself and just saying, yes, me too. So good. Love it. Can't get enough. But as I said, man, everybody is absolutely killing it in these movies. We gotta talk about Keanu Reeves as Neo. I mean,
he's Keanu Reeves.
he's had a what 3 decades plus of high profile movies, but I still think this is probably his defining character. I know John Wick is also extremely popular, but I don't know if it's ever gonna like top the popularity and just widespread recognition of the Matrix and his role as Neo. Truly a role he was born to play. I think he's just absolutely perfect for this sci-fi martial arts film.
I think he is. We obviously know in hindsight that I don't think he was the first choice. But needless to say, when
he was the right choice.
You hear some of the other names, and again, I'm not going to speak to films we never saw, but it's always a tough thing. But like you hear some of the names, and like Will Smith. All right, I'll say it. Will Smith was one of the names that they talked about, was offered Neo, and that just feels like such a different movie.
He said, "No, I have to make Wild Wild West instead."
I think that worked out for everyone.
Truly,
I think
yeah.
I think so, but but it just feels like a very different movie. Like Keanu was capable of being a little bit more stoic, whereas with Will Smith, I kind of always expect him to have that, especially at that time, always kind of have that Will Smithness about him, and it's definitely something that you would have a hard time shaking. But at the same time, I never saw that movie. Like that's always something that I try not to think about. Like, I've heard that said, like, Peyton Reed's Ant-Man. I have a friend who vehemently believes Peyton Reed's Ant-Man is better than what Edgar Wright's Ant-Man would have been. And I'm not even necessarily going to inherently disagree, but just we don't know that because we haven't seen Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. You may read the script, but a script is only half of the story. And so when I don't like going down that rabbit hole of what we didn't get is better than what we got, because I don't know. It's like Star Wars 9 is another great example. I've read Colin Trevorrow's script for Star Wars 9, and immediately I was like, oh, this feels a little bit more like it's following Last Jedi, but I don't know how Colin Trevorrow would have executed that script. I have no idea. So I don't want to jump into that conversation too much, but it's definitely something where Keanu's performance is, again, it became a hallmark of pop culture almost immediately. Like, how many people were making the I know Kung Fu jokes, like, immediately?
Yeah.
Almost immediately. And some of it maybe was people doing the whole, being ironic about it, but you can't deny it. He's important to this film, and I think he is the right choice. I think the type of subdued performance he's going with works for this character so much better than like I can't imagine this character being like a wisecracker or like smug or like, to the level of somebody like Will Smith, where like Keanu, it's much more subtle. Like obviously there's still quips and jokes, but like it's done in a way that vibes with the universe. And like I said, you can't discount that. And he's Keanu Reeves. I think this is definitely the biggest thing in his career. He's obviously got a few things now. Like obviously John Wick happened more recently. Obviously Bill and Ted you can't really ignore that. I'm obviously a huge fan. I've been a huge fan forever. But obviously Point Break, which is the greatest film of all time, so you can't ignore that either. But like
Speed, the greatest film of all time.
Speed, the greatest film of all time. God, Speed is so good. I can't.
It's awesome. It really is.
People don't talk about Speed, and not the drug folks. But like that movie, like he's in Point Break and Speed in like the early to mid '90s, and they're both great. Like so, like throughout the '90s, he's definitely doing good stuff. But I don't think John Wick is probably the closest he comes to a performance that like transcends pop culture the way The Matrix did, with Bill and Ted probably in number 3. Like, I love Bill and Ted, but I think that's a thing where I overestimate how much the general populace is aware of Bill and Ted, because like I love it, but it's one of those things where I love it so much, so I assume, oh, well, everybody clearly loves Bill and Ted, right? And then everyone's like, oh, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, what? Get out. Leave. But yeah,
Keanu Reeves is one of those actors that is insanely popular, and as like a human being, the internet loves him and loves to tout all the good deeds that he does, and well deserved. But there's also always been this thing
He's
where
not that good.
yeah, it'd be like, oh, is he even a good actor? And like,
Right.
yes, like
Yes,
I
he
don't
is.
mean to be. If you don't think he is, I don't. This is gonna sound like insulting, but like, if you don't think he's good at acting, I don't think you know what it takes to actually be an actor. Like, he is not. Even when he's playing like Bill and Ted or like Surfer Dude, like some of the stereotypical stuff he's known for, he's not just being himself. He's acting. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. And the Matrix movies, we talk about the contracts like Will Smith, and you think of Will Smith as being like charismatic and fun, and that just seems like such a weird decision because Keanu Reeves, I feel like he's playing the character so that Neo can kind of be this almost blank slate that people can project themselves upon, and you gotta feel that like in his deliveries, like the way they are so dry at times, you know, like I feel like it's all like a choice, like how much he's internalizing, and then whenever he does his kung fu is when it, you know, really shines and like comes out, and you kind of get that expression through the martial arts and stuff. So I don't know, I think he's made great choices. I think Keanu Reeves is a great actor, a very specific actor. There's, you know, some things that are very unique to him, I will admit that, but I think he's great at what he does. Love Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, he's great. But yeah, there's definitely, it's definitely been that undercurrent of, yeah, there's been that undercurrent of he always acts the same. There's, you know, he's always kind of blank, whatever. And I think that's all just very overblown. Like, you know, is every performance a slam dunk? No, but nobody is. It's acting's a nuanced thing, and I think he does a very good job at what he needs to do for the films that he does. And I think from John Wick to this to everything, he's not where he is for no reason. And I hesitate to think people who try to downplay his talent because they think it's, you know, hip or cool. It's not, folks. Be better.
All right, now that we've praised him a ton, I want to shout out this scene from the first movie. Another one of those scenes that lives in my head, rent free. It's in like the very beginning when he gets told to follow the white rabbit, and those people invite him to a party, and then he decides to go once he sees the white rabbit tattoo on the woman's shoulder. And I love this scene because it feels like the Wachowskis said, "All right, Keanu, give us like 3 different takes on you saying yes to going to the party." And then they just leave all 3 of them in the movie because he goes, "Yeah, sure, okay, I'll go." It's just like over and over again with these pauses. Go back and watch that scene, folks. It's very funny. All right, let's move through the rest of this main cast. Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity. Again, it just feels like perfect casting. It's just, once you see it, you can't imagine anyone else in this role. Carrie-Anne Moss is great. I love this woman. One of the most intimidating figures I've seen on screen in almost any role that she's in. Also appears in Memento, just 1 year after that first Matrix movie, a movie I often claim is my favorite movie of all time. And she is stone cold in that movie. Her performance is so good. In these movies, just kicking ass, probably more than anyone else in the film, honestly. I mean, gives Neo himself a run for his money with what she's doing, and, you know, wearing skin tight leather while she does it. It's just, it's got everything, this performance.
It does indeed. But yeah, Carrie-Anne Moss is great. She, like I said, she's been in so many things. She was actually ironically in like a Canadian fantasy series called Matrix in the early 90s, before obviously this movie existed, but has been in so many different things since then. Memento is, oh man, she is, yeah, cold-blooded in Memento. Can't go wrong checking that one out. Obviously, even before this, she was in Red Planet, one of those, another instance in the year 2000 where we just decided to make 2 movies about going to Mars. She was in one of those, Chocolat, just all over the place. And since then, still out there, obviously came back for the last Matrix film, and then played the character of Jerry Hogarth throughout the Marvel Netflix verse between Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Iron Fist, and the Defenders, and a couple of other things. But yeah, she's great in this. You bring up an extra point. She gets tons of action in this. Like I said, I don't know if I'd go quite to the level of Keanu, but clearly second with a big gap between her and anybody else. Pretty much any fight scene in this movie is Neo or Trinity. There's almost no in between. Even Morpheus himself doesn't really get in on the action too much this time around. But it's all great, and she's looking good while doing it, as you stated.
New to the team on the Nebuchadnezzar is Harold Perrineau as Link, our new captain, our new pilot, I should say, of the Nebuchadnezzar. And I like this performance for a very specific reason. Talk about like an audience surrogate. By nature of the story, he does not enter the Matrix. He's a natural-born human there in Zion. And so he is always watching the code of the Matrix while our heroes are within doing battle. And almost like 3 or 4 times in this movie, there's a big like climactic action scene, and then it cuts to him reacting like, yes, or oh God, or oh, watch out, you know, and it's telling us what we should be feeling at that specific time.
Right.
And they could not have picked a better person to do that. He's so charismatic and emotes so well. And anytime it cuts to his face, like screaming. One of the first times I ever remember an audience in theaters clapping and cheering is at the end of the big highway sequence here. Neo makes the save. It literally cuts to him and he puts both his arms up and goes, yes! And like the theater just erupted like in applause at that scene. Yeah. It was so cool.
What a rude audience. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But this is obviously he is a newcomer to the cast. While the character of Tank did survive on screen in the previous film, I do believe the implication here is that he died off screen. I don't remember, Chris. Could you
the reality is the actor chose not to return.
Well, I know the reality. So I just meant in story. I just meant in story. I
don't think it's explored. Yeah, they imply that he died, but I don't think there's like any side story that explains how it happened. He's gone.
Like I said, it is unfortunate that obviously Tank had there was a disagreement there. The varying stories will tell you that the disagreement got a little heated to the point that authorities got involved. Needless to say, he did not return for these films. Didn't do much of anything after The Matrix. Had a couple of things in the immediate aftermath, but overall, kind of disappeared. So Harold is brought in as Link, kind of his replacement. I think his character is the husband of their sister. I think that's correct. The story there. So
that's
and then she's obviously
Link.
Chris. I hate you. But so needless to say, she's got a vested interest in him not being on the Nebuchadnezzar because of what happened to her brothers. So he brings a good levity to the cast as well, because everyone else on the ship is kind of very dreadfully serious about what's going on and what's happening, and they are in a very dire situation. But just being able to inject that sly comic relief, the enthusiasm he has, and all of that into his character, and especially into the story, just makes it a little bit more palatable. And like you said, he's definitely almost an audience surrogate in a lot of ways, as far as being able to kind of really transmit what kind of we should be feeling as the audience. Not that we don't feel it, but it's more like just in line with what we're already feeling. So he's doing a great job. Obviously it's an unfortunate situation, but I think they came out of it. They came out the other side of it with a pretty good solution.
Gloria Foster returns as the Oracle. Just so wonderful, so just such like a perfect grandma type loving maternal figure. I love how she's always baking cookies in that first movie. Her interactions with Neo, they're just absolutely precious. I love their scene on the bench. And gotta say, R.I.P. to Gloria Foster. Passed away during the production of these films. She was not able to appear in the third Matrix film because of that. This would be her last screen appearance, but it goes out with something truly memorable.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very wholesome performance in a lot of ways. Like it's and in this film you do get a little bit more insight into what exactly the Oracle is, how the character functions within the Matrix. And it is unfortunate that she wasn't able to stick around for all of them. She passed away from diabetes, which is, unfortunate. But she does a great job in these films. Like I said, the warmth that she brings to the character, kind of humanizing that aspect of the Matrix, kind of adding in those ripples that maybe this thing isn't quite that black and white, or maybe not all the machines are quite on the same side. But doing a great job with it. And like I said, this is a fantastic performance, and I love it.
Randall Duck Kim plays the Keymaster. Andrew, is it okay to call like an elderly man adorable? He's absolutely adorable. I love how little
Chris,
he is. How he's always like.
You can call anything adorable. You just have to deal with the fallout of that.
Randall is adorable in this movie. I love how he's always meticulously working on his little keys. Like when he has to get saved, he's like being manhandled and thrown around and flown around by our heroes. I just. It's a very small, specific performance, but plot-wise is obviously very important, and makes the most of it. He's very cute.
He is. I like this performance a lot. This is another one that kind of immediately got I know it was at like the MTV Movie Awards, like the same year this movie came out. Like it was another thing that got kind of very quickly memed. His just always having the right key. He looks like he killed the janitor with the key ring that he has, but like he's making keys, making keys on the fly, which is always just funny. Like there's Trinity asks Link to give her instructions on how to hotwire this motorcycle, and he just hands her a key, and she's just like, you are handy. Like, all sorts of fun stuff like that. And Randall Duck Kim he's great. He's got small parts in The Replacement Killers, The Thin Red Line, and in The King, but you all may know him for being the voice of Master Oogway in Kung Fu Panda and associated media, which I absolutely love Kung Fu Panda. And Master Oogway is a big part of why I think that first film is so wonderful. And so it does not shock me at all that it is brought to life by a man as wholesome and adorable as Randall Duck Kim. And he even jumped into some John Wick stuff as well. Playing in John Wick 1 and 3 as the doctor at the Continental. So yeah, fun. Chris, I'm noticing a pattern. All these people from the Matrix keep showing up in John Wick. I don't get it.
What are the odds? Speaking of the MTV Movie Awards and memes and parody, Helmut Bacadis plays the architect of this movie. Just a role truly made to be parodied with the way he speaks and delivers and ergo and all these big words that no one really uses.
Apropos.
And, pretends to know what they mean. In that, specifically the MTV Movie Awards, Will Ferrell plays this part, and it is one of the funniest performances of that man's career. It's very funny.
Absolutely.
They actually put that whole parody like in the special features on the DVD Blu-ray release of these movies, which I certainly appreciate. But look, it's one scene. It's very specific. But kudos to Helmut for making that scene as memorable as it is.
All I have to say is just imagine Sean Connery saying this dialogue. It would be the most unintelligible thing ever committed to film. I just can't
It already is
imagine.
like so dense. Like no one watching that movie in theaters like really grasped everything he was saying at that time.
Right, right.
I think it's, I don't know. Part of what leads to these movie legacies, I think, is kind of they take a couple of watches to really pick up everything that's being delivered to you. But that scene is, like I said, so dense, and the dialogue is already so convoluted. But yeah, throw late stage Sean Connery on top of that, and
yeah, it's like it's the only thing I can imagine is like you had to purposely be like sound is not Scottish as possible. Like just take like all the inflections, don't do them. But he said no, as he said to so many things at the time, which led to him taking on hallmark of the show, LXG, which retired him effectively. So, but yeah, it is a small performance. Helmet makes it memorable, but like you said, the whole and that again, it's another iconic piece of this. Like this, the two guys in the room, all the TVs on the walls. Like you said, it was parodied almost immediately. Because it really is just a giant. It's an exposition dump, really. That's all it is. It's just the architect is just explaining essentially all of it to Neo. He's just telling him everything and basically explains to him that here is how every single person that has been in your position before has acted. We'll talk about the scene a little bit more later, but like it's just a giant exposition dump, and he makes it interesting. Neo is mostly just reacting to what he's saying, and it's very difficult to just make dialogue of a man's interesting while just being a man sitting in a chair, but he manages to do it. So definitely kudos to him for bringing that to life.
Rounding out this section of our episode, we have Monica Bellucci as Persephone and Lambert Wilson as the Merovingian. Two performances that I really like. Essentially, just one scene. We're seeing that a lot throughout these movies, but both like instantly classics, instantly memorable. I mean, Lambert Wilson and his speech about how he chooses to speak French because he sampled all the languages, and that's his favorite one to curse in. So memorable, such a scene-chewing villain that I know you love, Andrew, and is essentially representing like the devil himself within the Matrix. Then his lover, Monica Bellucci, who becomes a woman scorned, and he gets to experience her wrath. And it's interesting, isn't it, Andrew, that these programs are experiencing such human relationships that we wouldn't expect from programs. It's almost like the lines between the two are starting to merge. Interesting, isn't that?
Chris, I literally said that like 5 minutes ago. Yes, quite interesting. Very interesting. But no, I do like that these characters, and like I said, it introduces an interesting dynamic that all of the machines are not necessarily lockstep with each other. The machines on the outside, maybe, but when it comes to the Matrix and all the programs, things start to get a little awry. Go a little awry. Fix it in post. But I do like these performances. I remember seeing this in theaters, and I remember the Merovingians cause and effect. I drank some wine. Now I have to take a piss. Like that is just in. I remember that like vividly. Yeah, within his accent. Cause and effect. But
it is like wiping your ass with silk.
And then obviously,
which I've never done,
Bellucci.
but
I haven't either. I'm not exactly in a rush to try it.
Like I see the comfort being there, but I don't think it would be very effective. Which is what you want most out of your wiping material.
We're ejecting immediately from this. We're moving on. But it's a great performance. I like it a lot. Monica Bellucci obviously is fantastic. She has been in a great number of things, including I guess she's a possible alum of the show. We talked about Spectre. So we should have hypothetically talked about Monica Bellucci. But she's fantastic. That GIF I sent you, Chris, is actually from Twin Peaks: The Return. There's there's a recurring gag throughout that series of the show where David Lynch's character keeps getting these messages from dreams where Monica Bellucci appears. And so it's very straightforward. That's literally what it is. He's having dreams about Monica Bellucci where she gives him information. And
yes, that is what happens when I dream of Monica Bellucci as well.
Yes, she gives me information, that's for sure. But yeah, which is the most David Lynch thing possible. But yeah, it's very interesting to see her character and the Merovingian kind of at odds with each other. She's kind of over it. Her reaction to the Merovingian is like how I would expect any partner of that man to react, where they're just over it. They're over everything about the guy. Like the minute he talks, they're just like, man, screw this guy. Like it's just there's no love, there's no even respect, there's nothing. It's just almost pure disdain. And she makes that look really good. So yeah, great performances, and they're definitely some of our new characters that are definitely adding to the film's experience.
Look, there's more cast that we could go through. A lot of them are going to appear in the next movie. We'll talk about a lot of them then, but we've waited long enough. Let's jump into this movie. Let's talk about all the best parts of The Matrix Reloaded. And we're going to start with the high point, the best scene of the film, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, kick us off here. When is this movie just firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in The Matrix Reloaded?
This is very tough because there are a tremendous amount of great action sequences in this film. It is tough to pick one, but what I'm going to go with is the staircase fight between Neo and essentially the Merovingian's goons. If only because it felt like an excuse for the Wachowskis to be like, everyone use every single possible weapon throughout the existence of humanity.
Yeah. There's your werewolves and vampires.
Exactly. Why not? And that is, it's just really, it's ridiculous. So it all starts with a pretty iconic image. In the first movie, obviously, Neo stops a couple of bullets from Agent Smith, but in this one, we watch him basically stop hundreds. They all drop down. And then this leads to our big fight. And it's awesome. They're fighting all over this kind of grand two staircases kind of meeting up at the top. And like I said, it's one of those scenes that you could absolutely argue is just a gratuitous excuse to show people fighting. And we're all the better for it.
Absolutely.
We as a society have been made better by this. So, and just like you said, the variety of weapons. Neo has an extended one where he uses sais. There's swords, there's spears, there's shields, there's everything you could possibly think of. There's mace at one point, I think. It's awesome. It was definitely one where like I'm paying attention to the screen, just watching how this all goes down, and it's a blast. Obviously, this is pretty much this sequence of the film is pretty much just jumping from action scene to action scene to action scene to action scene for the most part. But this is what kind of kicks it all off, and this kind of comes after our initial meeting with the Merovingian, which actually I also love because, you think the Merovingian's going to be this thing they have to work to get towards. They just walk up and ask to see him, and they're just let in. There's no suspense there because the dude's not afraid. He's got no reason to. For these programs, there's no reason to think this time will go any differently than the other time. For guys like the Merovingian or even the Architect. They're not inherently thinking the place is going to go somewhere different. But so there's nothing really for them to think they need to be afraid of. But obviously, as Neo keeps getting revealed and his powers become apparent, his decisions become apparent, they realize there's something else going on here. But obviously, like I said, this leads to our big escape with the Keymaker. But obviously, Neo is stuck fighting all of these guys. And it's just a really cool, awesome, fun action sequence that kind of kicks off the final home stretch of the film as we kind of get to our cliffhanger of an ending. But yeah, I think it's a blast.
Man, I agree. I love this scene. My note literally just says, fight against the supernaturals rules. I love everything about this. I love him blocking that big blade with his hand, and they're all like shocked he was able to do it. But he does bleed because of it, showing that he's just a man, and the fight keeps going. I love the one guy that he pins against the wall and punches him, so he knocks him out. and he's stuck there pinned against the wall unconscious for like most of the fight, and you see him in a bunch of shots, and then at one point he comes to, grabs the weapon, and keeps fighting. Like he jumps back into it, ends up being the last guy that he kills. There's that great shot that I think they use in trailers even of them all going from one staircase to another. Like one guy's leaping, one's running on the wall, and it's all in slow motion. And it's like this big wide shot. It's like a Renaissance painting, like in slow motion. It just looks so epic, so cool. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love all the like hand-to-hand combat in this movie, and this might be the best one. That's just based on simple. I shouldn't say simple, none of it's simple, but nothing, much more than hand-to-hand combat and weapons. And pretty important stuff happens here. The Merovingian has a couple of lines that your first time through will probably not make a lot of sense. He keeps mentioning his predecessors. He says, your predecessors had much more respect. And then he says another thing about his predecessors at the end of the movie, which I only realized this time watching the movie that, like, we don't know what that means yet. Like that hasn't been revealed to us. The fact that we are in a loop in the Matrix. So a little bit of a plot sneaking in there. But yeah, man, it's a great pick. You're right about how iconic that scene is where he just holds up his hand and stops all the bullets. I mean, just really cool stuff. There's werewolves in this movie. It's great.
Yeah.
And ghosts. It's so crazy.
It's awesome. It's kind of an excuse to do whatever you want, and in a fake world you can do whatever you want. But that is an interesting little ripple there, because they don't really talk about the first one, the idea that there were ones before him. Or does the Oracle hint at it? I don't remember. But at this point, all it's been is like is hints and teases, and you really don't have any idea what it actually means. But yeah, it's easy to forget that going back to watch them, just being like, oh yeah, this actually isn't something that we really knew about yet. And to have that kind of seeded here, and then obviously expanded on by the architect, is another cool little foreshadowing, as they call it.
Andrew, it's a great pick, and I also had a really hard time choosing one favorite scene, but ultimately what I'm going to go with is the scene that your favorite scene immediately bleeds into. Because while Neo is fighting everyone, Trinity and Morpheus are trying to keep the Keymaker safe. And they take off and find their way onto a highway chase scene. And they've got the twin ghosts coming after them. They have agents coming after them. And this scene, it's like 10 to 15 minutes. It is a long chase scene. And it is just so good from beginning to end. And they literally built a stretch of highway to film this. They built almost 2 miles of highway just to film this scene. And at a very cool aside, something that I learned from like all the behind the scenes documentaries they make about these is the materials used to build that highway were recycled and became sustainable housing down in Mexico. So very cool thing for the production to do. Yeah, very cool. But just the idea, look, hashtag PP, we're here about the positives, but a common criticism you hear about these movies is while the first movie had groundbreaking special effects that it seemed to have held up, 2 and 3 start crossing the line where some of the effects feel dated. And sure, there's a few times where it's like full body CG in 2003, kind of like we talked about on Daredevil episode, like maybe the technology wasn't not quite there yet. But all in all, like I'm going back to watch these movies in 2023, and I'm like, man, I can't believe how practical everything is. Like they built a freaking highway. There's hand-to-hand combat. There's wire work. There is, of course, tons of CG. Most of it is enhancing what they filmed for real and filmed on actual film, by the way. These were not shot digital. So I think they've actually aged incredibly well. Like those very specific shots that people like to point out. Yeah, I get it. But all in all, this movie is still being made in a way that they just don't do anymore. And it is fun to go back to. And I think this highway chase scene is like the pinnacle of that. Like they had 300 cars that they were literally just there to smash and flip. And I love that the agents come back as a threat here because they were the big bads of the first movie. And then, like, the beginning of this movie, they make it clear, like, they're nothing to Neo. He's kind of evolved beyond them. But during this highway chase scene, you realize, well, really only Neo is the one that's
Right.
powerful enough that they're not a threat. They are still very deadly to Trinity and Morpheus. And so they get to like be bad guys again during the chase scene. And like that shot of the agent jumping from one car to another, landing on the hood and the car flips, just God, so cool. Again, I hate to be like old man yelling at clouds, but they don't make them like this anymore. And God, I love this scene so much. And I mentioned already the climactic finale where Neo arrives just in time to swoop the Keymaker and Morpheus away as the tankers, the two 18-wheelers explode. And then you get Link being all of us raising his fist. Yes. Yeah, man, I got it. There's another scene that was very close to my favorite that, of course, we're going to talk about here in a moment, but I had to ultimately go with this one as my number one.
It was this or the stairway fight. That for me, that was really where I was at, really trying to narrow it down. But this is just so. First off, like you said, it is long. It is easily a 10-15 minute chase sequence. Pretty uninterrupted by and large too. Like we're really only going back and forth between this. And it's nuts. The effects that we get with the twin ghosts, the agents, the car hopping, the wrecks, the crashes, everything. It is absolutely just unbelievable. It's dense. It's involved. There's a whole lot going on here, and it's just cool. Like you can't deny that. The mix of effects is definitely something that you notice. Like there's sequences where it's CG and then it transitions back to live action. It kind of falls right back into it. And this is probably stuff that's started a little bit heavier with Spider-Man the previous year, kind of really trying to merge that practical into CG and then back to practical. But yeah, I think it looks pretty good at the end of the day, especially for the time. Because that is something where you can definitely look at movies that were trying to go a bit beyond their capabilities at the time. And maybe there's a few moments, like you said, there's a couple of things where you can probably look at it and be like, maybe we reached a little too far on a couple of things here. But by and large, I think this movie looks really good. But this scene in particular, the way it's mixing everything together is exactly what it is. That's exactly the way you should be doing it. There's I can't remember the actual saying now, but it comes down to basically the idea is, you hear people talk about how CG makes movies worse. And I disagree with that because you only notice bad CG. You don't notice good CG because it's doing its job. And so it's always interesting to me to hear people kind of, they'll point to something like Mad Max Fury Road as like a good example. Like, see, it's all practical. And people have no idea how much CG is in that movie, which is tons. But because it's mixed with practical effects and it also looks good, you don't notice. And it just looks cool. Like, there's never a moment where you're like, they're phoning it in or whatever. And that's always the key.
It's so weird to me that CG is like the only special effect where people tend to judge its quality by whether or not you can tell that it's quote unquote fake. You know what I mean? Like people love, like you go back to like, I don't know, throw Labyrinth out there, like an 80s beloved classic. None of that looked real, but people love it, right? It's great. Oh, it's practical. It's great. Ghostbusters, classic movie. You're not buying any of that as real. Like, it is fake and puppets and even a little compositing there. Why? I don't know exactly why that is. And I've certainly been guilty of that. Like, I can tell something's kind of fake and CG. I'm like, ugh. But I don't really know why that is. It's very unfair criticism when you think about it. I think it has something to do with we see CG and we think computers. Oh, they're just using computers to do that. Whereas you see puppets and you think of someone like sculpting.
Computers are seen as lazy, basically. Like computers are like, oh, it's the easy way out. If you had done that practical, it would have been too much work. So you didn't do that, did you? And that's there's things you can't do with puppets. There's things you can't do with matte paintings. There's things you can't do with green screen. Like it's
insulting to animators, honestly. I have been guilty of these criticisms as well, but like even CG has tons of artists, truly artists,
right
behind it doing the work. So it's, I don't know, something to think on, something to be aware of. But I ultimately, all in all, I think the movie holds up pretty well.
I agree. I think that yeah, I think that it's a very, and I don't want to say that like the criticism of CG is just that it doesn't like it's not as simple, I think, as that it doesn't look real, because like obviously it's not real, but I think there's a I think it's just it looks bad. It just it's but where's the line of looking bad versus, I don't know. I don't really know what it is, but this movie holds up pretty well, I think. Obviously, there's stuff with like Neo's flying sequences, some of the Neo fights with the Smiths, where you can definitely tell things are looking a little rubber, but I don't think it takes me out of it in the way that, I've definitely had CG do that before.
Well, let's go and talk about that scene, because that's the other one that
Yeah.
I was thinking for my favorite of the movie.
Yes.
Neo versus 100 Smiths, or the Burly Brawl, as they called it when they were making it. Ultimately, so much of the budget went into this one scene because every single shot is a special effects shot. Whether they are duplicating Hugo Weaving's face to put him on all the lookalikes, or CG body replacements you see a few times here. And yeah, I guess what it comes down to, like you think about, because some of those complaints as far as, the CG not holding up are in this scene specifically, where
Right.
Neo goes full CG and you can tell. And like the alternative is we don't get this scene, or it's
Right.
not as over the top as it is. And so I would rather them swing for it, go for the ambitious take, and we get this crazy over the top action fight scene where we got one man versus 100 Agent Smiths. I mean, God, nothing better than 100 Agent Smiths, in my opinion.
Well, Chris,
but it's
just you wait until the next one.
I can't wait. But there's just so much inventive stuff here. I love like Neo pulling out the pole, and he does the first swing to break the concrete off of the bottom, and then he uses the pole like as a bow staff for the rest of the fight. There's one part where he throws one Agent Smith into a crowd of other ones, and there's literally a bowling pin sound effect as they all get knocked over. Like, we are just having fun, and truly seeing something we've never seen before. I mean, they are like inventing technology to make this scene happen. It reportedly cost like $40 million for this scene alone. And I think, hey, money well spent. It's extremely memorable. One of the more iconic scenes of the entire movie, especially that shot where he busts out at the end and Smith bodies just go flying everywhere. It's a ton of fun. I love it.
Yep, I agree. It's a blast of a scene. Just like you sent me that gif of just all the Smiths running out of the buildings, and just it looks so cool. And I think it's actually super impressive. All of the multi-Smiths, most of those sequences are shot using, I'm guessing, some mixture of green screen and various things, and it looks really good. Like there's several sequences where you've got 6, 8, 10 Smiths all standing together, and it's practical. It's practical, quote unquote. But
Yeah.
they're not.
Well, a lot of it
CGing
is.
the rest of them.
There are plenty of times you can pause it and
sure.
look at some of the background Smiths, and they're not Hugo Weaving. But
Right.
movie magic, like you see him in a mob, and you get enough of the front ones
assume.
to be actually Hugo Weaving, and it just your brain fills it in. It's very cool.
Actually, I don't know if you know this, Chris, but the Wachowskis actually perfected cloning technology for this sequence.
Wow!
Those are actually
that's why it
all
costs $40
Hugo
million.
Weaving. Yeah, it's not cheap. Then you have to incubate them, grow them, graft all of Hugo Weaving's memories onto them to create the animosity between them, create a sense of community. It's not easy, but they did it, and
that's how Hugo Weaving was in so many movies in the early 2000s, because there was 100 Hugo Weavings.
But yeah, it's not seriously, folks. I'm not actually saying that. But disclaimer, so we don't get sued by the Wachowskis. But no, it's a fantastic sequence, and it's pretty much our first. Like, we get a couple of action sequences peppered throughout the first bit of the movie, but this is kind of our first big fight, if memory serves. And it's awesome. That is actually something I will say. The beginning of this movie, we go a while before, and then it's during this scene, because this is preceded by a scene with him talking to the Oracle, where she basically is like, all right, the Merovingians who you want to talk to, because you need the keymaker. And that's probably a good 40 minutes into the film. It's deep into the film before he gets to the to the Oracle. And that's to be said, this is a pretty long movie. It's what I think 220.
Yeah.
So it's a long one. It's getting in there. But once it starts here, it pretty much just goes. It's pretty much a nonstop run to the finish. And it kicks off in big fashion with this sequence, which is awesome.
One of the quieter scenes that I really like that comes early in the movie, where we're talking about, it takes a while to build up to these action scenes, is whenever Neo is speaking with one of the counselors, Counselor Hammond, played by Anthony Zerbe, and a memorable role. I like how paternal he is when he's speaking with Neo. And they go down to the engineering room of Zion, and Counselor is saying he likes to go down there just kind of for perspective, because there's all these big machines that are keeping them alive. They're dependent on machines. And, what does it all mean when we're at war with machines? We're depending on machines. And Neo is trying to have all the answers. And Neo's like, well, we have control. And Counselor's like, well, what does that even mean? He's like, well, we could shut these down if we wanted to. And I love the Counselor's reaction to Neo saying that. He goes, oh, that's it. You hit it. You smashed it to bits. Like, oh, you know everything. And then he, explains to him, like, we do that, and then we don't have oxygen, and then we can't live. So is that really control? We can shut him down, be able to kill us. So is that really control? Who's controlling who? And then ultimately Neo is like, well, what's your point? It's like, I'm not making a point. It's just thinking. Just come down from perspective, to think. He's explaining to him that it's not so black and white as he believes. There's a lot of gray into it, which it becomes clear how these themes tie into the overarching story of these films. But I like the way it's delivered here. I like the subtlety and just kind of the quiet nature of the scene. I think it's well done.
Yeah, it's almost like there being shades of gray to the machines is a theme of this film, Chris. I've seen it come up several times now.
Yes.
No, I do want to shout out Anthony Zerbe real quick. He's a great character actor from just all sorts of different stuff. He was in the Charlton Heston version of I Am Legend called The Omega Man. He was in the Timothy Dalton James Bond movie License to Kill. I remember him as he's in the 1983 version of The Dead Zone with Christopher Walken, where he is on the receiving end of Christopher Walken's very iconic moment where he smashes this like vase or glass bowl or something with his walking stick and goes, "The ice is gonna break," and he's just looking at him all like he's like, "What's wrong with you?" But yeah, so he's a fantastic character actor. But I do really like that scene you're mentioning here. Like even when he's talking about how he doesn't sleep, stuff like that, where he's like, "I spent decades of my life asleep. I only ever sleep for a few hours," and I was like, "Oh, it's me." It's me. I can't sleep very long anymore. But it's so But there's always hope, folks. But it's like I said, just a great scene. It's just the one, really, isn't it? I don't think he comes back later in the film. I know he does come back for the next one too. But
just like when all the counselors are together, like deciding what to do with the ships, he's there.
Yeah,
this is like his big key, like one-on-one scene.
Yeah. That makes sense. But yeah, great stuff here. There are a couple of quieter scenes. Like we mentioned it, but the scene he has with the Oracle I really like too. Because that precedes your favorite scene of the film. But again, it's another quiet scene where the Oracle is kind of explaining things to him. And again, just building on the theme of this film, which is the first film kind of really cements it as machines versus humans. That's very much the theme of the first film. That's the nature of the conflict. If you're a program, you're with the machines or you're on the human side. There's very little gray area. And this film, just throughout multiple key sequences, is realizing maybe it's not quite that straightforward. And that scene with the Oracle is another one that I do really like. And
another, going back to the theater experience, one of the biggest laughs was whenever the Oracle says, "Why don't you have a seat?" And he's still trying to be defiant. He's like, "Maybe I'll stand." She's like, "Fine, suit yourself." And then he walks over and sits down on the bench. I felt like sitting. I did this because I wanted to.
Of course you did. Of course you did. Also, Chris, did you know Lee Winnell was in this movie?
For really?
Yeah.
Who does he play in this movie?
He plays
Or
Axel.
is it even like a named?
It's Axel is the
Axel.
character's name. And I'm trying to find out. He's one of the crewmates when that ship is attacked by the Sentinels while they're having the meeting. He's one of the two guys that's in the real world when the Sentinels are attacking.
Oh yeah, I just googled it. Yeah, there he is.
And so, for those of you who don't know, folks, Lee Winnell is a Australian screenwriter, actor, film producer, and film director. But most notably known as the co-creator and writer of a great many of the Saw films, writer on the Insidious films, and also director of the films Upgrade and The Invisible Man, all of which are, let me rephrase that, Upgrade and The Invisible Man, which rule. My experience in Saw films is much less consistent. But yeah, I was scrolling through the cast list and they were like, Lee Winnell. I was like, whoa, what? And it looks like he's just had he's Australian, so he's got was just hanging around that area and guess had a mild working relationship with the Wachowskis there. So but yeah, fun little cameo there.
That is fun. And that scene, so yeah, it's very dramatic because he gets killed by like this Final Destination type happenstance. And we have a voiceover of Morpheus at that time as we're going into our finale of the movie. And he's giving his speech about how there is no coincidence. And man, this dude knows how to hype you up. And I love whenever Niobe, played by Jada Pinkett Smith, who we didn't dive into, she'll be back next week, don't worry. She's like, I can't help but think, like, what if this is all BS? And he says, then tomorrow we may all be dead. But how would that be different than any other day? That's like, damn. That's cool.
Bro, what?
That part's not hyping me up. But whenever he turns it around he's like, but what if I'm right? What if tomorrow the war could be over? Yeah. Isn't that worth fighting for? Isn't that worth dying for? God, it's so good. I'm ready to go watch this movie again. It's so awesome.
It's the fish, man. It's the fish.
What fish. What did he say? It's fish. But
one's not going to die, folks. Sorry.
I love this finale is really well done. Like our climax, as far as like action scenes, has probably already happened with the highway. But we've got a lot of story intertwined here, and this final kind of chase to get to the source, taking out these energy plants and things. I love. Man, Trinity, she's so good. I love whenever, because she's promised not to go into the Matrix, and because those people died, she has to jump in and help save the plan. And Link's telling her, you only have 5 minutes. She says, in 5 minutes, I tear the whole goddamn building down. And jacks into the Matrix. And it's like, oh, it's so awesome.
Cold-blooded, but awesome.
So awesome. I love how, like, throughout these movies, Trinity and Neo, there's no like once they're together, they're soulmates. There's no taking. They'll do anything for each other. There's no strain on the relationship. It's just like, yeah, this is how it should be, and they don't waver from that. And I really like that.
Hashtag goals.
Truly, because their romance, just by nature of these movies, like you're not going to see them having a nice dinner together and catching up on things. Like they're always in a life or death situation. So like their love for each other is shown. I mean, yeah, they do get a sex scene, I guess I should say. I
was going to say easy there, bud.
They do. That does happen. But they mostly are showing it through like literally saving each other's lives and just showing that they will do absolutely anything for the other one, including in Neo's case, possibly doom humanity just to save the woman that he loves.
So that means I guess we should talk about the architect scene a little bit more. But I mentioned it in the intro there, just how it's mostly an exposition dump. But this is where he clarifies that this is the sixth version?
Sixth time, I think. I think it's around the sixth
version.
Go-round.
But he specifies that the previous 5 all chose to save humanity and basically just restart everything. Basically, they chose to go off to the side, choose, 16 women and 7 men, which I don't like the math on that, folks. But to restart humanity, to restart humanity and kind of restart the whole process. But that also means that eventually it will reach this point again. It is an endless cycle. And they know it. The architect knows it. Everybody knows it. It'll just come back around like it always does eventually. And Neo, but the thing is the difference between the previous 5, or however many it was, and Neo, that the previous 5 simply had a kind of love of humanity. So when it came to the choice of going back and maybe saving a couple of people or saving the human race, they chose to save the human race generally without question. Neo is different because his love is almost exclusive. Not that he doesn't love other people. I'm not going to say that he doesn't, but I don't know what he's up to. It's so his love for Trinity is kind of the most paramount thing to him. So if he has a chance at saving her, he's going to do that. But it essentially means that the incoming machine invasion and all of that won't be stopped. They're not going to reset anything. They're not going to undo anything. They are faced with that reality, which could lead to the total extinction of humanity. And that is kind of the difference.
That's heavy.
That's heavy. It's very heavy. So Neo, of course, opts to save Trinity, realizing that means he will have to fight essentially all of the machines, and he may lose. But he's not going to let one person, especially the person he loves, go unsaved if he can help it. It reminds me a little bit of this Superman story that came out recently that I really, really like. I was actually just found the trade for it the other day, but it's called Superman Up in the Sky by Tom King and Andy Kubert. So it looks beautiful. But the crux of that story is a girl has been, a little girl has been disappeared. She's disappeared and no one knows where she's gone. And Superman has basically scoured the earth. This girl's not here. So Superman is left with the realization that whatever took her is not on Earth. And basically everybody goes to him, and even Lois is kind of like, you can't. I don't think Lois tells him this directly, but he's basically, the advice getting is like, you can't scour the universe for one person. Like, how are you going to do that? And Superman is basically like, I'll figure it out. And so the whole story is Superman traversing essentially the entire galaxy and or universe looking for one person. Because that's
a very Superman thing to do.
I can't think of a more Superman thing than being like, you know what? I could just not look for this person. But I'm not going to because I can. And as a very there's not iconic necessarily, but there's a line at the end I really, really like. And it's he finds the girl because of course he does. But she asks him, she's like, are you going to save everyone? And he says, no, but I'm going to try. And again, it just feels, it's when you get Superman, it works. But it's the same thing with Neo. It's like, I'm not, especially with Trinity, obviously this would be more like a Lois thing, but he's like, I'm not going to not save this one person, even if it means facing insurmountable odds. And that, again, we're just explaining why Matrix Reloaded is probably in the top 5 Superman films of all time. But it
truly up there. And then I don't
the fight in 3
ahead,
obviously.
But the fight in 3, yeah, that I rank that pretty high as a Superman fight. But we'll get there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of this movie, he saves Trinity. He has to break the news to Morpheus that the prophecy was just a lie told as a form of control, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't know how they're going to say. He doesn't know. But he's going to try, like you're saying. But he does not know. He chose to save Trinity, but does not have an escape plan. And that's essentially where we leave off. I mean, there's a couple of cliffhanger things, like he can suddenly feel sentinels in the real world. We'll get more on that in the next movie. And then, of course, we haven't mentioned yet, but Ian Bliss plays a character named Bane, whose body in the real world gets inhabited by, if you'll allow me to borrow this phrase, the ghost of Agent Smith in the shell of Bane. And kudos to Ian Bliss for coming into this role and basically doing a Hugo Weaving as Smith impression and doing a pretty damn good job of it. I'd love him just cutting his palm and seeing what it's like to be human. We get a lot more of it in the next movie, but again, like the characters in a way already been decided by another actor, and then to come in and like imitate that in a way that feels believable as a no small feat, but I think he nails it.
You gotta shout this out. And like I said, we'll see more of him a little bit in the next one. But man, it's like an uncanny valley type thing. Like you see Bliss in the real, or you see Ian Bliss's Bane in the real world, and like there's just this, he's Agent Smith, but like it's a completely different person. Like it's unbelievable, but they look just enough alike that like there's this uncanny valley at play where it's unsettling almost. Like where you're like, it's him, and he looks sort of like him, but not enough like him. And it's just, it adds to the unsettling nature of the character. And obviously our big stinger is that Bane is the sole survivor of this 5-ship massacre that happened after somebody triggered an EMP prematurely. And gee, I wonder who it was. But yeah, it's man, yeah, like I said, props to that guy. He's shown up in a couple of things here and there. He was apparently in Superman Returns. He was apparently in Stealth. Just a bunch of bit parts here and there, a couple of television shows. Seems like he's another Australian actor that they picked up for the ride here. But yeah, gotta shout out that performance, because it is hitting all the right moments of exactly what it needs to do to create that unsettling nature of Agent Smith in the real world.
Andrew, I love these movies. They're so good. I love talking about them, and I can't wait to keep diving into them. Like
Chris,
I said,
had no idea.
We haven't talked about this several times in our life. After watching that movie, I'm hyped up. I want to go watch the third movie. These movies, the Matrix movies, like every few years, I just do like another deep dive. Like I watch all of them. I dive into some of the documentaries, the extended stuff, the Animatrix. I love just about all of it. The video game, Into the Matrix, that one has not aged too well. But all of the scenes that they filmed with Niobe and Ghost are in the special features of like the deluxe Matrix Experience box set that I have. So I have actually watched those. Man. I love these movies. Yep. Next week, can't wait. But look, until then, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can. You can hop into our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. If you aren't there already, there's a channel called Question of the Week for you to drop those cues. Or you can send us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com. This week, our question comes from Oculus Neko, who, in response to our TV show movie month that just ended, wants to know, what TV show do you think would be awesome as a parody / satire / spoof movie, like the Brady Bunch movie? Great question, because the Brady Bunch movie rules. I love the very concept of that film, which if you haven't seen it, like it takes the 70s TV show The Brady Bunch, this super wholesome classic American TV sitcom, 60s, excuse me, and sort of updates it by bringing them to the 90s and not changing anything. And just by transporting them to the 90s, it becomes a satire, because they're like the squeaky clean Brady Bunch, but around them are like normal humans that act normal. Right. You know, like it's just such a fun concept, and I think they just absolutely nail it.
The cast, especially the cast for those.
Oh, so good.
Gary Cole and Shelley Long as Mikey Carl Brady, like they anchor that whole thing. But man, those are so good. Both there's two theatricals. There is a further follow up that I think Gary Cole and Shelley Long are in, but none of the rest of them. But they are so good. But man, like the easy answer is like another 60s sitcom, something like The Partridge Family. Like I feel like you could definitely just put it in that same sandbox, but that also feels like cheating. Like it just feels like, oh, just do that same thing again. But man, I'm trying to think if there's something. Well, and then like, because it's such an easy thing too. Like something like the Flintstones movie, I guess like could have gone for something like that. Like you could. Yeah,
that one kind of it. I like the movie, but it's kind of having its cake and eating it too, while being earnest, but also acknowledging that it's silly. It still works, but something a little bit different.
I don't know. Actor of all time in it, so
Rick Moranis.
It's got both the greatest actors of all time in it. So
John Goodman,
Kyle MacLachlan. But,
it's got a murderer's row
yeah,
of greatest actors of all
Halle
time.
Berry. It's absolutely ridiculous, all the people that are in that movie. But well, and it's interesting because like I know there was that Flintstones comic a few years ago. I don't know if you ever heard anything about this.
I did not.
It's absolutely wild because like it treats it's this meta approach that like adds these contextual layers and like adds all of this backstory and history to the characters, and like there's a whole conversation where they're talking about how because the cartoon, I don't know if it expressly pointed out that cavemen still existed, but the Flintstones weren't cavemen. So the comic like dives into the fact that there's these two different types, and like there was a war between them. It adds all these weird contextual layers. People seem to love it. I've never actually read it, but it is like a super meta, wild approach that I think if you were gonna do something like the Flintstones, you absolutely could do. It would just very much not make it a kids movie. Like it would be this weird meta, almost existential approach to it. But I'm trying to think if there's something like more.
What if something new? I'm trying to think of things like I grew up with. Like what if Friends, which feels like a current sitcom, but it's 30 years old right now. Crazy. So what if you did something like updating that, like the concept of
people still make shows Friends now that are basically the Friends mold now.
Right,
they do that all the time.
But
it's
a lot of the things that people like poke fun of is like they're 6 friends with so jobs with these giant apartments, and they always have time to hang out at the coffee shop with like this reserved table. Like, what about everyone else in that world? So I think you could kind of poke fun.
Yeah, you could have some fun with that.
Of that for sure, yeah.
I mean, something where like you just kind of acknowledge the intense privilege of the characters, and kind of there's certainly something to be said for the idea of just approaching it from the kind of, you could do it with almost any sitcom, but just like poking apart, like you said, the thing is like they're at the same coffee shop and they sit at the same table all the time for hours at a time. Sometimes it seems like you could absolutely have people just being like, are you guys going to order anything? Are you guys going to leave it? Like pointing out just kind of the absurdity of the reality of what sitcoms are, and just like
they think they're like a fun, quirky group of friends, but like everyone else hates them.
Annoyed by them. It's you got something like that, or just like I said, when they're just pointing out like the ridiculousness of it, like, and I know there's definitely been like jokes made where it's like, how do you guys afford apartments like this, like with your jobs, like how does all of this work, how does it happen? But I think if you lean harder into it, something like a Friends or something like that could definitely be a little bit more like open to being a satire / parody, or at least kind of adding that meta commentary to like create a bit more of a awareness.
I feel like Two Broke Girls was kind of an answer to that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I've watched a ton, but I feel like it's speaking to like the millennial. Hey, it's hard out here for millennial to hold it together.
Yeah, definitely.
You kind of show them the reality. So like, yeah, take characters like the ones in Friends, put them in the world of a Two Broke Girls, and see where you can go with that.
I think that's definitely a key to the mindset, is that transplanting of like the characters with like, you don't change the characters, you just put them in a new environment. And I mean, that's the key to any successful like I just watched Airplane and Airplane 2 yesterday, and you kind of look at how those movies approach the comedy and the satire, and a lot of it is the characters that are being funny aren't treating it like it's funny. They're playing it straight. And when you contrast that with the reality, it just makes it funny. And so like that's something like how the Brady Bunch is so funny, because at no point does anyone in the Brady Bunch think that how they act is wrong or strange or weird. For them, it's completely normal, and it's that dedication that makes it funny. It's like Leslie Nielsen's character in Airplane at no point like laughs at what's happening. He's literally straight-faced the entire time, and that's what makes it funny. Because before that, Leslie Nielsen was almost a completely serious character. It's actually almost funny to watch some of the stuff he's not in, or stuff he's in when he's serious, versus the stuff when he's being funny. because his performance really isn't that different. He's
No,
kind of doing
it's
the
just the
exact
material,
same thing.
yeah.
It's just the environment around him and the scenarios that he's in. Like, he's in a slasher with Jamie Lee Curtis called Prom Night, where he plays like her dad. He like disappears halfway through the film and never comes back. But in that one, he's just totally straight. Like, he's normal, but he's in the slasher film. And then but again, like, his performance is pretty much exactly the same. And he didn't get known for funny stuff till he was in his 50s. So folks, if you think it's too late for you, it's not. Rest in peace, Leslie Nielsen. But yeah, I think Friends is something, or just that Friends model is something that's kind of ripe for a more meta commentary. I mean, stuff like the Brady Bunch and Partridge Family, that was all comedies when it was on. It was meant to be funny, but yeah, I think if you're looking for something more recent, yeah, I can't think of a lot of, like, I'm trying to think of like more iconic
What about like
shows.
Cheers? But you've got like your regulars that are like, friends that hang out at a bar. And then you've got your like drunkards and genuine barflies and very sad people.
Or just approaching the reality that if you guys hang out at a bar this much, you are alcoholic.
Yeah.
There's something there. I mean, again, that's kind of you would be able to play in a lot of the same places as like the Friends one too. Like, you point out that these guys hang out in this bar and they're these strange characters, and it's a tough thing because I think it's easy to take something from the 60s and move it to now and have it feel very out of place. But I think certain scenarios, as you move into the 90s, the 80s and the 90s especially, like, simply transplanting them on its own isn't really funny enough because it's not as overt and it's not as obvious that they're, a family pulls up in a Partridge Family bus now, they're going to look super weird and everyone's going to be like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. But like, you pull up in a car for the 80s or the 90s, people are like, oh, they're on hard times. They bought a cheap used car. And it's like, oh no. Oh no. Now we're just realizing the state of our economy. But it's definitely, I think those older shows have an easier time kind of using that meta approach versus something more recent. So I don't know. I think Friends is an easy answer just because you really could take that formula and really just do a lot of commentary on just kind of the absurdness, the privilege of the characters, whatever you want to call it, for some pretty good comedic effect there.
What TV show do you think is ripe for a modern parody? What would you like to see? Let us know. Hit us up on social. Jump into that Discord. Shoot us an email. However you want to talk to us, we will listen. And just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Head over to TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
People just really don't seem to care for them. Reloaded is more better received, Reloaded more better. It's fourth grade again, guys. But